Christmas Eve has a way of showing you exactly who you matter to and who you never really did. I learned that the hard way the year I flew home with a suitcase full of wrinkled clothes and a heart still aching from the betrayal that blindsided me in Seattle. I was 33, though it felt like life had aged me 10 extra years in one long, brutal day. I remember riding in the back of that Uber from the airport, watching the Christmas lights smear into streaks of gold and red on the wet pavement. The driver hummed along to some holiday playlist, and I stared out the window, trying to convince myself that the worst part of my year was already behind me. I still wonder what you were doing right now while listening to this. Because for me, when this story began, I was in that back seat fighting the sting of unwanted tears and hoping the world would give me a break for at least one holiday. Just 12 hours earlier, I had been in the small office of the startup I helped build from scratch. Tyler Brigg, my partner and the man I once thought I could trust with my future, stood there holding a folder while avoiding my eyes. He told me the board had decided that he should take full control of the company. He never looked ashamed, only relieved. His new fiancé's uncle owned the biggest share of the investment. They had planned it perfectly, smiling at me in meetings, pretending everything was fine while preparing the paperwork that removed me from my own creation. The last thing I saw before walking out with my box of belongings was the crooked logo I had designed still taped to the wall. By the time the elevator doors closed, the company was no longer mine. With nowhere else to go, I booked a last-minute flight to San Jose. I told myself spending Christmas with my dad, Gregory Keller, and his wife, Serena, would be a temporary bandage. Serena never liked me, but she tolerated me, or at least pretended to. I thought I could survive a few days under the same roof. When the Uber dropped me at their house on December 23rd, their driveway was lined with bright reindeer lights and fake snow sprayed across the windows, even though real snow was on the forecast. Serena opened the door, wearing a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than my month's rent. She smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. My dad hugged me tightly, almost too long. But as soon as he let go, he glanced at Serena like he needed to check if everything was acceptable. The house smelled like cinnamon, cloves, and pine. Every room was decorated. It felt warm and festive, something I used to love as a child. I told myself I could manage a couple of days, especially since I hadn't rented a car. I figured I would stay inside, maybe borrow one of my dad's cars if I needed to. I didn't imagine needing escape options. Not then. By late afternoon on Christmas Eve, the house was buzzing with preparations. Caterers had already delivered trays. The kitchen counters were covered in half-prepared dishes and expensive ingredients. Serena told me to help her finish dinner. I said yes because saying no on a holiday felt wrong. Even if she always found a way to twist my efforts into an insult, she asked me to carry a large crystal bowl to the dining room. It was cold and heavy and beautiful. I didn't know it belonged to her mother. I didn't know it was her favorite piece in the entire house. I just knew my hands were dry and trembling from everything I had been through. The bowl slipped. It fell at an angle. It hit the tile floor with a sharp crash and exploded into glittering shards. For a moment, the world went silent. Then Serena screamed. Not startled fury. She rushed toward me, demanding to know what was wrong with me. She said I had ruined the holiday. She accused me of being careless, disrespectful, and intentionally destructive. She told me I had never respected her. Not from the day I met her. My dad rushed into the kitchen, startled, asking what happened. Serena turned on the tears instantly, grabbing his arm like I was some threat she needed protection from. She told him I scared her, that my presence made her uneasy, that she could not stay in the same house if I stayed. My dad looked confused, torn, and helpless. He told her to calm down, but Serena only clung to him harder, sobbing louder each time I opened my mouth to apologize. Dinner time arrived. The table looked perfect, like something out of a holiday magazine. Serena sat down, folded her napkin with trembling hands, and announced in a clear, cold voice that she refused to eat if I remained in the house for even one more minute. My dad looked at her, then at me. His eyes shifted in that small, devastating way I had seen before. The way that meant he was choosing the path of least resistance. Choosing her, not me. He cleared his throat, stood up, and told me I should go for the night. He said it was better for the household, better for Serena's peace of mind, better for everyone. I reminded him I didn't have a car. I had arrived by Uber. He looked uncomfortable and said he was sorry, but Serena needed space. She stood behind him with her arms crossed, and that faint victorious smirk she never bothered to hide from me. I told him it was freezing outside. I told him it was Christmas Eve. He didn't change his mind. He walked to the hallway closet and pulled out my thin gray sweater. Not my coat, because that was still in the guest room closet, just the sweater. He held it out to me like he was returning something he found on a sidewalk. I didn't move fast enough. Serena stepped forward and grabbed my small suitcase from beside the stairs. She shoved it into my chest so hard I stumbled backward. She told me I had already ruined enough of her evening. Like he hated doing this, guided me toward the front door. His face looked strained, he still did it. He opened the door wide and cold air rushed into the house in a bitter wave. Snowflakes drifted across the hardwood floor. He didn't care. I begged him to reconsider. I told him I only dropped a bowl. He stared at the dark street instead of at me. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat and tired and carried the weight of someone determined not to argue. Lauren, you need to leave now. I tried to take one step inside to ask him to just let me stay in the foyer until I arranged a ride, but he placed both hands on my shoulders and guided me firmly across the threshold. Not violent, but deliberate. A final dismissal. He let go only when both my feet were outside. Then he closed the door and locked it. The click of that deadbolt sliding into place went through me harder than the cold did. I stood on the porch in my thin sweater, snow melting into my hair, my suitcase at my feet. I pulled out my phone out of instinct, but the screen flickered once and went black. The cold had finished what the low battery started. I could see shadows moving inside as they continued their evening like nothing had happened. Like I had never been part of that family at all. I walked because I had no choice. The snow kept falling thicker now, the wind cutting through the fabric of my clothes. My teeth chattered. My hands felt stiff. Somewhere in the distance, music drifted from a neighbor's house. Laughter. Warmth. Life is moving on without me. I walked because I had no choice. The snow kept falling thicker now, the wind cutting through the fabric of my clothes. My teeth chattered. My hands felt stiff. Somewhere in the distance, music drifted from a neighbor's house. Laughter. Warmth. Life is moving on. I made it to the small park near the old church and sat down on a stone bench under the flickering street lamp. My fingers were numb. My phone battery was dying. Every rideshare app said no cars available. Then I heard it, the soft scraping of bare feet on snow. An older man walked toward me. His hair was silver and tangled. His skin had a bluish tint, like the cold had already seeped into him. His feet were bare on the snow. He shivered violently as he asked in a quiet, broken voice if I knew whether any shelters had space that night. He said he had walked from Bayshore, that everywhere was full. He had less than I did. And that thought broke through every shard of pain in my chest. I stood, pulled off my only warm coat, and wrapped it around his shoulders. He clutched it like he couldn't believe it. Then he held my frozen hands for a long moment. His touch was icy but gentle. He gave me a small look of gratitude that I felt deep in my bones. Then he walked into the fog. I sat again, colder than before, but strangely lighter inside. I didn't know what time it was. I didn't know what to do. I was shaking so hard my vision blurred. Then I heard a deep engine roll into the park. A long black limousine eased to a stop in front of the bench. Its headlights cutting through the falling snow. The back door opened. The man I had given my coat to stepped out, but he was no longer shivering or broken or barefoot. He wore polished shoes and a warm tailored coat. His posture was strong. His skin had color again. He looked like someone entirely different, like someone who belonged in a car like that. He walked toward me, calm and steady, brushing snow from his shoulders. He stopped a few feet away. He looked at me with quiet certainty. Then he said 3 words, and my Christmas Eve ended there, suspended on the edge of whatever came next. He said 3 words, "Come with me." For a second, I honestly thought I had imagined them. The cold had slowed everything inside me, like my thoughts were packed in ice. But then I saw his hand, steady and open, waiting for me to take it. Every instinct I had built as a woman alone at night screamed at me not to get into a stranger's car, limousine or not. I pulled back on the bench, my jaw shaking so hard my teeth clicked. I managed to ask what he wanted. He did not step closer. He kept a careful distance, like he had learned long ago how not to frighten someone who was already hanging by a thread. He said I was in danger out here. He said cold like this was not something you pushed through with grit. He said if I stayed on that bench much longer, I might not wake up at all. He told me he had somewhere warm and safe, and that if I got uncomfortable at any point, I could tell the driver to take me anywhere I wanted. I looked down at my hands. Snow had crusted in the folds of my thin sweater. My fingers were stiff. My toes had gone beyond numb into a frightening nothingness. I thought about walking back toward the neighborhood and knocking on a stranger's door. I thought about ringing my dad's bell and seeing Serena's face, triumphant and cold. Those were my options. Sometimes trusting a stranger is less dangerous than trusting your own family. So I stood up. My legs wobbled. He didn't touch me until I took one step in his direction. Then he offered his hand again, and I let him guide me those few feet to the open limo door. Heat rolled out like a soft wave. The smell of leather, cedar, and something faintly warm wrapped around me. I half fell into the seat, the warmth stinging my skin as the feeling started to return. He got in across from me and nodded to the driver. The door shut with a soft thump. The car glided forward. For a few seconds, I just stared at the passing lights. Christmas lights blurred through tinted windows. Trees swayed. Neighborhoods slid past like pieces of someone else's life. My body hurt as blood moved back into my fingers. I focused on that pain because it meant I was still here. I looked at him then, clean now. No shivering, no purple tint to his skin. Older, late 60s maybe. Lines carved deep around his mouth, but his eyes were steady. He pressed a button on a small panel and quietly told the driver to take us home. Not my home. Hi. He told me his name was Elias Ridgewell. He said he had run a large real estate group in the Bay Area for decades, and that he had been retired for a few years now. His voice had the quiet confidence of someone who spent a lifetime making high-stakes decisions, and now treated them like old memories. I said my name in a voice still rough from the cold. He repeated it softly like he was memorizing it. He asked if I needed a hospital. I shook my head, told him I was just frozen, tired, and maybe a little stunned. He gave a small nod. He said he usually had to walk much longer before anyone would even look him in the eye, let alone give him their only code. I blinked at him, confused, he explained. Every Christmas Eve for the past 20 years, he left his estate without a phone or wallet and walked the streets like someone who had nothing. He said it started the year after his wife died. When he realized how easily he had forgotten what true hardship looked like, he said he made it a ritual. He would walk until he found someone who chose kindness when no one was watching. Some years he found no one. Some years he settled for someone who tossed a few dollars without looking at him. But this year has been different, he said. This year someone gave away the only warm coat she had. I sat there trying to understand the twist my life had taken. I told him I didn't know what he wanted from me. People like him did not usually enter the lives of people like me without some kind of catch. He smiled faintly, not wide, just enough to soften his face. He said all he wanted tonight was to get me warm, fed, and safe. Everything else could wait until morning. I leaned back. I let my eyes close. The hum of the engine blended with faint music from the front of the car. My body sank deeper into the seat. When I opened my eyes again, we were turning through tall hedges toward a set of row iron gates. They opened automatically. We passed a small security booth. The driveway curved under old trees until a house came into view. Large stone, warm light glowing from the windows. Quiet wealth, not the loud kind Serena loved. The limo stopped under a covered entry. A man in a dark suit opened the door for me. Inside, the house felt like stepping into a different world. With smoke, spices, a massive Christmas tree in white and gold, a stone fireplace taller than I was, books everywhere, family photos, nothing sterile or showy. A home. Elias guided me into a living room and motioned for me to sit. A woman appeared with a tray. A mug of hot tea landed in my hands. The heat seeped through my fingers, warming me from the inside out. Elias sat across from me. He didn't pry. He simply said I looked like someone who had been dropped too many times in one day. He said if I ever wanted to talk, he'd listen. If not, he'd respect that too. I drank the tea slowly. My eyelids kept dropping. The woman returned to say a room was ready upstairs. Elias told me to get some sleep and that tomorrow would make more sense. Upstairs, the guest room looked like something out of a catalog. White linens, thick comforter, a faint lavender scent. The woman handed me flannel pajamas. I changed clumsily, slid into the bed, and was asleep in seconds. The next morning, I woke to sunlight pouring across the sheets. It took me a full minute to remember where I was. Then everything rushed back. I wrapped the robe around me and followed the smell of coffee. Downstairs, a room full of tall windows overlooked the lake I had only glimpsed at night. Elias sat at the table reading papers. He looked up and nodded toward the seat across from him. A mug of coffee appeared. The smell made my eyes sting unexpectedly. He studied me quietly. Then he said I probably had questions. I told him that was an understatement. I asked him why he did all this. Why did he pick me up? Why bring me here? What he wanted. He rested his hands on the table and said that people like him spent too many years calculating value in numbers, deals, profit. He said somewhere along the way he stopped seeing people who struggled. He said he made himself a promise years ago that if he ever had more than he needed, he would help someone who had nothing left but a good heart. He said I had given away my only coat without expecting anything in return. He said that mattered. He said he could not undo what my family had done or what my partner had taken from me. But he could give me one thing I desperately needed. A chance to choose my life again. Not from the middle of a cold park bench, from a place of safety. Warmth. Clarity. I stared out the window at the lake, glassy and still under the winter sun. I told him I did not know what he expected from me. He said nothing. Not yet. Not until I decided what I wanted. I held my mug in both hands, trying to absorb the warmth. For the first time in months, the future didn't feel like a cliff. It felt like a question, and questions were gentler than cliffs. I told him I didn't trust this yet, but I didn't reject it either. He smiled that small, quiet smile again. He said that was enough for today. And in that winter morning light, sitting across from a stranger who had given me shelter when my own family wouldn't open their door, I began to wonder what it might cost to say yes. The next morning, the answers started to unfold in small, careful pieces. I woke to pale winter light sliding across the ceiling and the faint clink of dishes coming from somewhere below. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. The bed was too soft. The room was too quiet. Then the memories of the night before came rushing back like cold water. The bench, the snow, my dad's hand on my arm, the stranger in the limo, who was not a stranger at all. I pulled on the robe and slippers that had been left for me and stepped into the hallway. The house felt different in daylight. Tall windows pouring light into long halls. Framed photos of people I did not know. Oil paintings of places that looked like old Europe. It was grand but not showy. Everything felt intentional, lived in, not like the staged perfection in Serena's house. I followed the smell of coffee and something warm and buttery. It led me to a room that looked out over the water I had glimpsed in the dark. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a wide, still lake with tall trees rising on the far bank. The sky was clear, a flat winter blue, the kind that looks colder than it feels. Elias sat at a small round table near the glass. He wore a dark sweater and had reading glasses low on his nose as he studied a stack of papers. When he saw me in the doorway, he took off the glasses and gave me a small nod like he had just been waiting for me to appear at exactly that moment. He told me with a calm assurance that I was safe here, that no one in this house would put me out in the snow or raise their voice at me at the breakfast table. He said it the way other people might say good morning, like it was simple, obvious, not the rare thing it felt like to me. A woman came in and poured coffee into a cup in front of me. The smell made my chest ache a little because it reminded me how long it had been since someone simply took care of me without strings attached. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic and tried not to let him see how much it meant. There was a folder on the table near his elbow, thick, cream-colored, with a few tabs peeking out the top. He rested his hand on it for a second, like he was weighing whether to open it. Then he said he had asked his staff to look into something after I went to bed. Not about me, he added quickly. About the people who had put me on that bench in the first place. My stomach tightened. I stared at the folder and then at him. Some part of me braced for judgment, for him to confirm that I really was the problem, that Serena had been right all along, that I was careless and unstable and whatever else she had said in the kitchen while sobbing into my dad's shirt. Instead, he opened the folder and slid it a few inches toward me. He told me that from public records and documents anyone could access if they knew where to look. It was clear my dad had once been careful with money. He had a solid retirement. An old-fashioned mix of savings and investments built up over decades. Then, about 2 years earlier, something changed. Accounts that had been steady began to shrink. A home equity line appeared. Money was moved from safe places into what he described gently as adventurous choices. There were transfers into accounts with only Serena's name on them. There were large withdrawals before holidays and luxury purchases that did not line up with my dad's old habits. I stared at a copy of a statement showing a high balance one winter and a much lower one the next. It felt strange seeing my dad's name printed in neat type on paper that belonged to someone else's world to this man sitting in front of me with all his quiet power. Elias did not bombard me with numbers. He simply pointed to patterns. He said that in his experience, when money starts to move like that, it is rarely because the original saver suddenly becomes reckless all on their own. More often it is because someone close to them starts tugging on strings. He spoke about Serena without venom, almost clinically. She had joined a small circle of people who liked flashy investments. Friends of friends who promised big returns on things that looked shiny but were mostly air. A wellness startup in Arizona, a luxury condo project in Florida, a private fund that guaranteed double-digit returns with almost no paperwork. He tapped a page that listed Serena's name connected to one of those ventures. My dad's name was not there. Yet, the money had come from an account they once shared. He said softly that looking at the pattern from the outside, it seemed Serena had been moving my dad's comfort out of safe places and into things that gave her more excitement and control. He also mentioned something that made my throat tighten. My dad's old golf buddies appeared less and less as co-signers on anything. The few recurring charges that used to show dinners with them had disappeared. The cards used at those places now showed Serena's favorite boutiques instead. He said that to him it looked like a familiar story. A man who loved peace more than conflict. A woman who loved control more than peace. He paused then and sat back in his chair. He told me he knew how manipulative people could be inside a family because he had lived it from the other side. He spoke about his son Mark. How Mark had married a woman who seemed charming and attentive at first. Elias said that slowly over years she isolated his son. She whispered that Elias was old-fashioned, that he was holding the company back, that he did not understand the new world. She made every disagreement a sign of disrespect. She framed every question as an attack. By the time Elias realized how far things had gone, he was outvoted in his own boardroom. Documents he had signed in good faith were used to nudge him toward retirement. His son told him with a stiff smile that it was time for new leadership, for fresh ideas. The ideas were not Mark's, they were hers. He described the day he packed up his office into 2 cardboard boxes and carried them past reception while employees averted their eyes. He walked out of the building he had built, just like I had walked out of mine, betrayed by blood and by trust. He met my gaze. Then in that moment, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Understood. Not pied, not judged. Just understood. My throat burned. I tried to swallow it down, but the tears came anyway. They were hot and humiliating, and I hated crying in front of anyone, especially someone who had opened their home to me as a stranger. I covered my face with my hands, but my shoulders still shook. Elias did not rush to fill the silence. He did not tell me to calm down or say it could be worse. He did not tell me to look on the bright side. He let me cry until the first wave passed. Then he slid a small box of tissues closer to my side of the table and looked back out at the lake to give me a sliver of privacy. I wiped my eyes and said I was sorry, old habit, apologizing for emotions. He told me there was nothing to be sorry for. That when the people who are supposed to protect you end up using you or discarding you, it leaves a specific kind of wound. And that, in his opinion, no one should have to figure out how to heal from that while shivering on a park bench with no coat. I let out a shaky laugh at that because he said it so plainly, like it was the most obvious statement in the world. He folded his hands on the edge of the table. He said that for now he wanted to offer me a room in his home for a few days, long enough to sleep, to eat, to let my nervous system remember what it felt like not to be on constant alert. After that, if I wanted, he would help me look at what had been taken from me, both in the company and in my family. Not out of charity, he added, but because he believed in balance. People should not be allowed to strip others of what is theirs without at least being challenged. I looked at him wearily. The offer sounded too clean, too generous. I asked him what he expected in return because no one does something for nothing. Not in my experience. Not anymore. He smiled at that, a tired, almost sad smile. He said what he wanted was to see if the kind of heart that gave away its only coat without a second thought could still exist in a world like this. And if it did, to make sure that heart did not get stamped out completely. He said I could help him with some of the work he did later if I chose to stay. Evaluate projects, visit programs his foundation supported, bring my eyes and my judgment to decisions he no longer wanted to make alone. For the first time since he had picked me up, the word foundation registered. I realized I was sitting across from a man whose decisions probably moved millions of dollars a year. A man who had resources I could not fully picture. And I was in his house because I had put my coat on his thin shoulders in the back. Dark. It was almost too much to take in. Part of me wanted to say no on principle to prove I could make it on my own, that I did not need to be saved. Another part of me, the one with the bruises from being shoved out of my company and my childhood home on the same day, knew pride alone would not keep me warm or get me justice. I stared out at the lake. The water was still, a pale mirror reflecting the winter sky. My life felt like that surface in that moment. Calm on the outside, while everything underneath twisted in unseen currents. I told him quietly that I would stay for a few days, just until I could figure out my next steps. I said it plainly, trying to make it sound temporary, manageable, like I had not just stepped into something much bigger than myself. He nodded once, as if he had expected that answer. He told me there was no rush, that we would take it one day at a time. As I sat there with my hands wrapped around a warm cup and the weight of his offer settling over me, I did not know that saying yes, even with conditions, was the first real step toward reclaiming pieces of my life I had assumed were gone for good. I followed him down the hallway, still unsure if agreeing to stay had been a moment of clarity or a moment of weakness. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles around places built for thinking instead of noise. When he opened a pair of tall wooden doors and stepped aside for me to enter, I realized we were in his study. It was enormous, lined with shelves packed with books that reached almost to the ceiling. A wide desk sat in front of tall windows that looked out onto a slope of green, stretching toward the lake. The room smelled faintly of leather and cedar, a warm, steady scent that grounded me the moment I stepped inside. Elias motioned toward one of the chairs facing his desk. I sat down slowly, my palms pressed against my thighs to keep them from trembling. There was something in his expression, a careful patience, as if he knew this next conversation needed to land gently, even though it might not feel gentle at all. He sat across from me and rested his hands on the desk. His tone was calm when he asked if I had ever wondered why my startup had pushed me, not just in the way that happens when partners fight, but in a way that looked planned, coordinated, almost orchestrated. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. A part of me wanted to pretend I had never considered it. But the truth was, I had replayed every meeting, every late night, every conversation with Tyler since the day he handed me the separation folder. I had turned the memories over so many times they felt thin and brittle. I told Elias it started when Tyler and I broke up 3 years earlier. We had been partners before we were anything else. But once he began dating again, especially once he got serious with the woman he eventually proposed to, things shifted. Decisions got made without me. Rooms I used to walk into freely became closed doors with whispered voices inside. I started finding errors in financial reports that should never have been there. Small things at first, easy to chalk up to oversight, but then patterns, then missing documents, then meetings where people spoke as if my position were optional. I told him about the day Tyler brought his then-girlfriend to the office. She had a polished smile and a handshake that felt like she was measuring how tightly she could squeeze before it hurt. She listened politely when I spoke about the company's direction, but afterward I overheard her telling someone in the hallway that I seemed anxious, that I might be overwhelmed, that sometimes founders just are not built for scaling. Elias listened without interrupting, not even when my voice cracked a little. He leaned forward slightly when I mentioned how in the last several months, Tyler had started looping his fiancée's relatives into discussions about our products, even though they had no official stake in the business. Then, Elias turned his laptop toward me. He said he had asked someone he trusted to look at some things that were publicly accessible, along with information Tyler himself had disclosed in investor reports. He clicked a few keys and a document opened. The layout was simple, a collection of notes and charts. My name appeared several times. Next to it were phrases that sent a cold pulse straight through my chest. Unstable, overreactive, difficult to collaborate with, unreliable under pressure, words I had never seen attached to my performance evaluations, words that looked like they had been fed into conversations months before mine. Exit. He pointed out a timeline at the top of the page. It showed a pattern of comments from Tyler and one of the investors. Comments that painted a picture of me as unpredictable long before any official documentation indicated concerns. Little suggestions slipped into the ears of decision-makers, repeated just enough times to sound like truth. He said softly that in his experience, when people want someone out, they begin by rewriting that person's story. They chip away at credibility until the foundation cracks. They stop describing what the person does and start describing what the person supposedly is. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. I thought of all the times I had walked into rooms and felt a conversation end a fraction too quickly. The way some people looked through me instead of at me. I had told myself it was in my head, that I was too sensitive, that I needed to toughen up. But it had not been in my head. He clicked to the next page. My heart stopped when I read one particular note. It referenced a name I had not expected to see anywhere near my professional downfall. Serena, not directly connected, not involved in the company, but there in black and white under a list of acquaintances linked to a small investment circle. A circle that included the family of Tyler's fiancée. I blinked at the words, unsure if I was reading them right. Elias explained gently that the connection was not close, not something obvious, but enough to raise a question. Enough to make a person wonder how conversations traveled between certain social groups, how rumors found new light, how narratives quietly drifted from dinner tables to business circles without anyone ever stepping into the light to take responsibility for them. I felt heat rising up my neck. I shook my head before the words even left my mouth. I asked if he was suggesting that my stepmom might have known something about what was happening to me. Maybe she had heard something, maybe repeated something, maybe helped shape a story that ultimately pushed me out of the very company I had poured my whole heart into. He did not nod. He did not shake his head. He said only that social networks are sometimes far more tangled and far more toxic than we expect. Those small comments can become large shadows. That the people who smile the brightest can sometimes be the ones carrying whispers that ruin a person's reputation in places they never see coming. My chest tightened as if invisible hands were pressing against it. Memories flashed. Serena's smug look in the kitchen. The entitled tone in her voice when she said I made her feel unsafe. The way she clung to my dad like I was some threat rather than his daughter. I felt a nausea that was not physical but emotional. A sudden unraveling of beliefs I had held for years about how my family worked, about what they knew, about what they would or would not do. Elias closed the laptop slowly, as if giving me a moment to breathe. He said that sometimes the truth about our families is not a single revelation, but a series of doors opening one after another, each showing something we were not ready to see. I stared down at my hands in my lap. They looked small, pale, unsure. I realized I had been holding on to the hope that my dad had simply folded under pressure. That Serena's cruelty was personal but isolated. That what happened at the startup was independent of what happened in my family? But what if it was all connected? What if the threads crossed in ways I had never imagined? What if I had been standing in the middle of a web without knowing it? I swallowed hard. I felt something solid settle inside me. Not anger exactly. Not yet. Something quieter, but heavier. The beginning of clarity, the beginning of deciding that I could no longer look away from any of this. I raised my eyes to Elias. He watched me with calm attention, his expression neither pushing nor pulling, previously waiting for me to find my own words. I told him I needed to know everything. Whether it hurts or not, whether it shattered the last pieces of what I believed about my family. I needed to see it all because what they had done to me at that house and what Tyler had done to me at that company had come from somewhere deeper than one broken bowl or one selfish business decision. He nodded once slowly, almost like a promise. And in that quiet study filled with morning light, I understood that the truth I had been avoiding for years was about to come into full view, and there was no turning back from it. The truth I had been avoiding for years was about to come into full view, and there was no turning back from it. That realization sat with me the rest of the day like a stone in my chest. I drifted through the hours in the Ridgewell house in a kind of quiet haze. I took a long shower, let the hot water loosen muscles I had not realized were clenched. I borrowed a clean sweater from the closet in the guest room. I walked along the edge of the lake behind the house, my breath puffing in the cold air, watching small ripples spread across the surface when a duck landed and skidded for a few feet before settling. No matter what I did, my mind kept circling back to my dad's house. My suitcase was with me, but there were still things in that room. A photo album I had kept since high school. A box of old journals, the winter coat Serena had refused to let me grab as she shoved my sweater into my hands. It was not about the objects themselves as much as what they represented. I was not ready to let her pretend I had never existed there. Late that afternoon, I found Elias in the library flipping through a book, glasses on his nose. I told him I needed to go back and pick up the rest of my things. He closed the book carefully and asked if I wanted someone to go with me. I shook my head. Some parts of this I needed to face on my own at least once. He walked me to the entry where a driver was waiting. Before I stepped out, he suggested calmly that I might want to record the interaction in case anyone ever tried to rewrite what was said or done. He said it without pressure, just as a practical thought. I nodded slowly. The idea made my stomach twist, but it also gave me a strange sense of quiet strength. The truth would be whatever it was, but at least this time it would not be only my word against theirs. On the ride over, I pulled out my phone and checked the battery. It was nearly full after charging all morning. I opened the camera app, set it to record, and slipped the phone into the pocket of my coat with the lens pointing outward. I practiced walking and moving my arms a little until I was fairly sure the angle would capture whoever stood in front of me. The closer we got to my dad's neighborhood, the more my chest tightened. The houses looked like they always had, big and bright and full of the kind of security money could buy. Nothing on the outside showed the fractures inside. The driver stopped at the curb in front of the house. I sat there for a few seconds, watching my own breath fog the window, then finally opened the door and stepped out. The snow from the night before had been plowed to neat banks along the street. The sky was a pale gray, the kind that could go either way, sun or storm. I walked up the driveway slowly, feeling every step. My feet knew the path by memory. The porch felt both familiar and foreign. I pressed the doorbell and waited. Serena opened the door. She did not look surprised. She looked almost pleased, like she had been hoping for this moment. Her eyes swept over me and the coat I was wearing, taking everything in. She stepped just far enough into the doorway to block it. Holding my breath. Before he could say anything, Serena stepped forward again, reclaiming the space between us. She said my dad did not want me in the house. She said it was too upsetting for him. She said they had agreed that it was best if I stayed away. I did not look at her. I kept my gaze on my dad. I asked him if that was true. If he, not Serena, wanted me gone. My voice came out softer than I intended, but clear. He stared at the floor for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his words were quiet. He said it was complicated, those things were delicate, that Serena had been through a lot lately, and he needed to consider her feelings, which was not the same as saying what she claimed. She cut in before he could finish. She said, yes, that was exactly what he meant. That he wanted me gone, that he wanted peace, that he did not need me dragging drama back into his life. She told me to stop putting him in the middle. She said grown women did not show up at their parents' houses demanding attention when lives had moved on. She said that I was always making everything about me. Every word was being captured in my pocket. I took a slow breath. The part of me that was still that hurt girl wanted to scream, to shove past her, to run into the room that had been prepared for me and empty every drawer. But another part, the part that remembered the folder on Elias's desk and the quiet strength in his voice when he talked about facts, not feelings, took control. I told my dad I understood. I told him I would not make things harder for him. I said I hoped he took care of himself. His eyes flicked to mine just once, a flicker of something like regret breaking through. But he did not speak. I turned and walked back down the steps, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. Behind me, the door closed. This time, I did not flinch at the sound. It felt final, but in a different way than it had on Christmas Eve, less like a wound, more like a line being drawn. In the car on the way back to the Ridgewell estate, I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording. My hands shook a little as I hit save. I replayed a few seconds, just enough to hear Serena's voice telling me I had no place in that house, claiming my dad wanted me gone. My own questions, my dad's weak attempt at nuance being bulldozed. When I walked into the study, Elias looked up from his desk. I held out the phone. I did not trust myself to speak until he had watched it. He put on headphones, clicked play, and sat back. I watched his face as he listened. His expression did not change much, but his jaw tightened at certain points. When it ended, he removed the headphones and set the phone gently on the desk. He said I had more than I realized, that I did not just have bruised feelings and memories. I had evidence. Evidence of how I was treated. Evidence of who answered on my dad's behalf. Evidence of the dynamic that had been hidden behind polite small talk and staged family photos. He told me that Serena had just done something very foolish. She had revealed herself clearly without knowing she was being observed by anyone who would ever challenge her. Story. For the first time since I had walked out of that house, I felt something besides grief. I felt a small steady flame of resolve inside my chest. Serena still thought I was the same girl who could be pushed out the door with a sweater and a suitcase, who would walk away and swallow the hurt. She had no idea who was sitting across from me now, listening to her words on a recorded file, already thinking about what they might mean for everything that came next. I replayed Serena's voice in my head again, the way she had spoken for my dad like he had no voice of his own. She had no idea who was sitting across from me now, listening to her words on a recorded file, already thinking about what they might reveal about everything that came next. Elias sat back in his chair for a long moment, fingers steepled. Eyes lowered as if arranging pieces of a puzzle only he could see. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. He said there was someone he wanted me to meet. Not a therapist, though he said there would be no shame if that was what I needed too. A lawyer. One who understood both the messy world of startups and the tangled knots of money inside families where affection and control often looked dangerously similar. Her name, he told me, was Marilyn Cooper. She had spent decades representing founders forced out of their own companies and older clients whose spouses or children quietly rearranged their finances until nothing looked familiar anymore. Late that afternoon, I found myself in a smaller sitting room on the west side of the house. It felt softer than Elias's office, with deep chairs, warm colors, and a stone fireplace that held the faint smell of charred oak. Outside, the sky was turning the kind of muted gray that made the lake look like polished steel. A knock sounded at the door, and a woman in her late 50s stepped in. She carried a worn leather bag and a notebook thick with use. Her iron gray hair was twisted back neatly, her eyes sharp and steady behind thin glasses. Her suit was simple and dark, but her earrings were bright blue, catching the light as she moved. She shook my hand firmly, addressing me by my full name, with the kind of calm that came from having already read more about me than I would ever admit aloud. We sat down. Elias shifted to the side, but stayed in the room, letting Marilyn guide the conversation. She asked me to tell her, in my own words, how the company began, how I met Tyler, how we went from scribbling ideas on napkins to renting our first workspace in a cramped co-working building where we lived on energy drinks and vending machine snacks. I told her about the angel investor who wrote our first real check, how I cried in the parking lot afterward, overwhelmed by gratitude and possibility. I explained the early equity split, the founder agreement we both signed, how everything was 50-50ths on paper, even if I was the one writing most of the code and managing operations. I told her how when bigger investors came in, we renegotiated percentages, but I had trusted Tyler so completely then that I did not question them, language in the later documents as closely as I should have. Marilyn took notes slowly with deliberate strokes. Every so often, she paused to ask a pointed question. Who drafted that agreement? Whether I had received copies of every revision, who had been in the room during certain conversations, her attention never drifted. When I mentioned Tyler's fiancé and her uncle joining the investor group, Marilyn made a faint mark in the corner of her page and nodded slightly, as if that detail confirmed a suspicion she already carried. Then she moved to what Elias had shown me earlier. The way Tyler and one particular investor had quietly labeled me unstable, unreliable, emotional, the narrative they used to justify pushing me out. She said that if we could prove they had exaggerated or fabricated concerns about my performance while concealing their true motives, the case might reach beyond a simple business dispute. It could be a breach of their duty to act in the company's best interest. Her words felt sharp but strangely comforting, like someone had finally turned on a light in a room I had been stumbling through in the dark. Then she shifted to my family. Elias slid the folder he had shared with me across the table. Marilyn opened it, flipping through each page without a sound. Bank transfers, dates, investment documents, notes connecting one suspicious movement to another. She paused occasionally to ask about my dad, his age, his health, whether he had seemed confused or hesitant about the financial changes Serena pushed him into, whether he had ever complained, even in passing, about feeling pressured or rushed. I told her my dad had always been steady with money, not sophisticated, not adventurous, but grounded. He was saved. He planned, he avoided risk. But after Serena arrived, the ground shifted. Vacations became flashier. Restaurants are more expensive. He mentioned a real estate investment once that sounded rehearsed, like he was repeating Serena's words instead of his own. He had laughed it off, but now it echoed differently in my memory. Marilyn listened with a kind of clinical warmth. Then she said the words I had been avoiding. It looked like a pattern she had seen many times. Slow erosion of control, transfers from joint accounts into personal ones, high-risk investments that benefited the spouse or their relatives more than the household, signatures that might not be authentic. She was careful not to accuse outright. She said the law reserved certain terms for situations that could be proven, but she said at minimum it pointed to undue influence, potential financial abuse. She explained the possibilities in a steady, grounded way. On the business side, there was potential to challenge the circumstances of my removal. Maybe not to reclaim the company entirely, but to secure compensation or leverage negotiations in my favor enough to ensure Tyler never held unchecked power over me again. On the family side, she said there were legal tools to protect my dad if he was willing to acknowledge truth, updated powers of attorney, financial reviews, reversals of questionable transactions, and, if necessary, filing formal reports of exploitation. She warned that such paths were painful. Families cracked under the pressure. But sometimes healing required ripping away the facade instead of pretending. Nothing was wrong. I asked whether she thought Serena could have casually shared information among her social circle that made its way to Tyler's fiancé. She said that proving direct collusion would be nearly impossible without explicit evidence. But social overlap alone could influence negotiations. It painted a picture of how easily narratives about me could have traveled through small social rings twisted and reshaped by people who barely knew me. She asked about witnesses, neighbors who had seen Serena cutting off my dad when he tried to speak, relative who had watched him become quieter over time, people who had quietly wondered but never said anything. A few strong statements could reveal a behavioral pattern that might otherwise remain invisible. By the time our meeting ended, my throat felt sore from talking. My pulse was still unsteady. But beneath the exhaustion was something that felt almost like hope. Not the naive kind that assumes everything will work out. The sturdier kind that comes from having a plan, from knowing what direction the next step should go. Life at Elias's house developed a comforting rhythm in the following days. I started walking the loop around the lake each morning with one of his dogs, trailing behind me, the air cold enough to clear the clutter from my mind. Sometimes Elias joined me, slower but determined, pointing out changes in the water or the sky, like he was teaching me how to see things again, not just look at them. We ate dinner at a long wooden table most nights with a fire crackling nearby. No one asked me to be cheerful. No one asked me to justify my pain. Conversation wandered from books to music to silly stories about Elias's childhood. And for the first time in months, I felt the constant buzz of dread begin to fade. Then one afternoon, everything shifted again. I was in the kitchen waiting for the water in the kettle to cool when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my half-sister Hannah. She was almost 15 years younger than me. I told her that I did not build it alone. Many people had worked hard to make this real, but I said I did help open the door. I added that the rest, everything, that would happen inside these walls, all the laughter and homework and arguments and birthday cakes and late night talks would belong to her and the other kids and families who lived here. This was their home now. She thought about that for a second, then nodded like it made perfect sense. She slipped her hand into mine and pulled me toward the entry, excited to show me the courtyard garden, as if she had already claimed it in her heart. As we walked through the doorway together, I felt something settle inside me for good. The girl on the bench in the snow had been told by her own family that there was no place for her, that she made people unsafe by simply existing. Now here I was holding open a door so other people could step into safety, into belonging, into a life they had been told they did not deserve. I did not need Serena to understand what she had lost. I did not need Tyler to watch me succeed without him. Their consequences were their own. My revenge, if you could call it that, was choosing to build something decent and solid out of the wreckage they left behind. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening.